Feel free to chime in and join our conversation. So our guest tonight is Mardi-Ellen Hill, who is a distinguished composer and also an author whose 30-year writing career, combined with her musical background as a composer and award-winning composer, is really quite unique. She's also highly acclaimed in the business world as well, and in synergy and integration. And she's received acclaim in multiple fields, a real Renaissance woman. And she's won recipient of an award from the American Society of Composers and Publishers from ASCAP. She's also been awarded 2 grants from the National Endowment of the Arts, the Annette Cad Fulbright Grant, and as well as many other honors. She's taught at many universities, including Stony Brook, Mount Holyoke, Bard College, and others. And we're delighted that she can join us tonight to talk about her work. Welcome, Mardi-Ellen Hill.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. I'm really pleased to be here.
So where are you calling in from tonight?
From Soundtrack Studios, 21st and Broadway, where I've done much of my work. And I'd like people to know that this is a fabulous place to be recording and to be working. And this is after many years of doing much work with my associate, John Keel, right here.
I'm so glad you can join us in the heart of New York City. And it's great to see that the studios are functioning and that they're surviving, because it's such a challenge for all of us, whether it be artists, whether it be studios. I know I've frequented a lot of the rehearsal studios, and I know there's a couple of them have closed. So it's great to see that the businesses are able to survive and weather the storm as we go to that next chapter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, there's much going on here, as I can see it.
Well, it's wonderful to hear that that art is being made and that the studios are doing recordings. So tell me about your work, Marty. You have such an interesting and varied career. Let's start at the beginning. How did you get into music? Did you always know that you were going to be a musician?
Always drawn to music, always writing music, always singing, always playing the piano. Music was not really my very first path. The very first path really was in science and in math. So I put that path in the background for many reasons. And then for other reasons, I just began to put the music together with the science and began to see the connections between the music and the science. And that's really what interested me.
So music and science certainly will come into play later with your writing. So so how did you make the choice between music and science? You seem to have someone with so many talents. How did you when you were in high school, when you were forming as a musician and a person, how did you make those choices?
I think I was actually quite naive. I didn't realize that I had an inventor mentality. I had no idea how hard it would be to be an inventor, to think about the world in very different terms. I really didn't understand as a young child the difference between science and sci-fi. So I kind of leapt into it. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that as somebody who was older, but my beginnings were really by trial and error, which is the way all science is, all science innovation is by just trying things out. So I had the aptitude and the freedom to do that. And so I did. I actually built this sci-fi or science, at the time sci-fi, into a stage work. And that's how I really began to try my hand 30 years ago. It was a work that was produced by Yale. And I had 2 NEAs in a New American Work. And I was able to do 6 separate sections of them and be able to workshop them at a pace where I could see how this clockwork of information that I was forming on the stage would begin to have a reality of its own. And I used the stage as basically a piece, a experimenting place for me to be able to try out my hand.
Now, was this particular piece one of your first time writing large scale forms?
Yes.
Wow.
And I had no idea what I had leapt into, believe me. It was my first. I began actually with a little kernel because I was a dance accompanist who could play classical music and who could also improvise well. And I actually got fired from a job as a dance accompanist because I was told that I had too much control over the petit allegro, the center stage. So I was always building this idea of these elements on stage. And finally, I submitted, I think, one section of it to the NEA for a new American work. And they said, why don't you build out many more sections based on this kernel of an idea?
How long was that opening kernel that you started with?
15 minutes. 15 minutes of stage information that I had. I built actually a set of analog tracks that combined a complete word patterns and music together, sort of Meredith Monk style, if I had to pick a style, though it's not exactly. And I overlaid many other composers with that. And that was the takeoff point for being able to do something that had a tableau to it. And I brought in a choreographer at NYU while I was teaching there. And that got submitted to the NEA a second time around. And they gave me enough money to build out the next really 4 to 6 sections. So I built it like a Lego set in pieces.
Now, with your writing and with each of these components, you did the composition of the music as well as the book. You put that together?
I did, because I basically wrote the music elements of this stage in these sections. So that took quite a long time to put the 6 sections of the big work together. That was a good decade of writing music.
Yeah, it's amazing how long it takes to put your ideas in motion. These are such abstract ideas that you're coalescing into one unique whole. So a decade, wow.
Well, I had 2 or 3 separate commissions. And one was at the Groupe Musique du Vivant in Lyon. And they gave me an amazing studio for like 3 weeks, all kinds of equipment. So I was really honored to have so much given to me. So in each section, I kept collating it and putting it back into the whole piece of the tapestry. And I did it as the commissions came to me.
Now, how did you connect the story? Tell us the beginning of the first, that gives the general plot of this universe you've created, because it is a universe. We've talked about it. I met you this summer. We've been in contact all summer, and I've been delving into your world, and I'm so impressed by first of all your wide expanse of knowledge and bringing it all together and tying it into such an interesting concept and having music at the core. So for the audience who may not know your work, tell us about your process for creating this incredible world.
Well, I'm trying to think of the date. I actually was living in Paris, and I was walking through Paris imagining what certain parts of Paris historically would look like. And I actually was listening to Martha Argerich play Bach. And as I was walking, I was thinking about different key structures that would be actually embedded in the street and connected through the arrondissement. So I was actually layering in the information of music, topography, geography, history, this acoustic envelope that I was building in my head as I was moving through it, and also building a clockwork of information. So I was sort of playing a game with myself to see how I could remember these keys that I actually put and in a certain sequence, and find my way back to that sequence. So the idea of physicalizing the sound and physicalizing it in this urban environment, like a spaceship, was something that I thought was very interesting, that I could actually keep going back to. and like a time capsule, and begin to unfold this pattern that I had left there as a set of instructions. That's very abstract, but it actually wasn't abstract at the time. The physicality of being in the city and of the memory system being attached to these keys and the music unfolding was enough to keep me very interested. I think I had to keep myself interested.
Well, certainly, you have such an active mind between your science and your music and connecting the two. And we both know that in the Baroque, the keys had certain musical characteristics that were important. Did that play into any of your thought process? That key, that tonal centers, and the relationship.
Very much the idea of tonal centers, and then fast forward to a very Schoenbergian idea of 12-tone music, because I was trying to think about, the diatonic scale, which plays a very big part in the end game story that I wrote, the hexachord, the pentatonic scale, and how these scales evolved over time. So if I thought about this spaceship of sound, as the spaceship was moving, the scale was changing, right, with the time and the century. But it was basically the idea that no matter how much that scale scaled up or scaled down or changed scale, it would still remain in this very specific set of tonal centers. Exactly.
So it accompanies the passage of time through the centuries with this same pattern. Very cool.
The same pattern, but decipherably, and my team members certainly know that, it doesn't appear so, right? It's basically the way we would go back and look at music theory and think, well, whole note, half note, breve, semi-breve, it depended upon what century you were in, that unit value was considered the unit. So upon looking at this system at first, people thought, how could you have that many patterns when in fact it's really one pattern that's taking on all of this different nomenclature?
Wow. And what a great place, Paris, such an eternal and ancient city. I know when I was in Paris walking around, I got to walk around Notre Dame before the terrible fire, and just looking at thinking about a building built in the 1100s, and I just think about what music was heard there as time changed from the birth of organum all the way until polyphony into modern into today. If those walls could sing, it must be just like Mend, where the centuries bring forward, and the change is so interesting.
Well, you hit on the point, Jason, that I'll tell you that brought me to pop culture, commercial film, television, which is that I actually, in this story that I bring in the star who dies in the story, people will have to read the story for that, but my original stage play just stayed in Paris. When I built this story to a much larger orchestration, the idea was that this acoustic envelope actually did exactly what you're saying, which was to appear in Carnegie Hall and say that the same ancestry that built that acoustics in the 1100s was now going to show up, meaning the people who were coming to the concert were coming because they understood that this acoustic envelope had appeared. So it's basically like saying that the sound and the acoustic structure was following the genealogy of this ancestry of this dynasty that I'm writing about.
I just love historical, like fiction and history and music tied in. It created what an interesting and varied world. That's such an interesting topic. When we first met, I was just taken in by this idea and how you came up with this topic. And has it taken you in unexpected journeys as you've been going through this, as you've been exploring?
Very unexpected. Actually, a friend of mine wrote to me, in the last 2 years, that Microsoft was doing many experiments with using human DNA to store records. And she said to me, I can't believe they don't know you, because you're talking about the same exact thing. Of course, from my end, it was saying the people who make the records are actually the composers, and their DNA is already has that information stored. So of course it would follow that you could store record information in human DNA since it originates from human DNA. So those are the kinds of unexpected developments as I was doing this, that I was obviously onto something that was outside of the realm of sci-fi and coming into this whole idea of cellular information and how we carry any information.
What was it like to see this come to life on the stage when you first started to see these projects take form?
It was much more exciting than doing the business part of it. It was extremely exciting because I also was doing it at a much slower pace than I'm moving now. I wasn't writing a book. I wasn't adapting the music. I wasn't thinking television or film. I was just writing the segments on the stage and was able to manipulate them for myself. I was very lucky because I had some reviewers come to the previews who really liked it. And that was a crapshoot because really it was still I was really experimenting.
Sounds like you were blazing a path that's really never been done before. From your first kernel of this, the first 15 minutes to the longer form, what were some of the changes that you made musically?
Well, I actually made, by the time I got to the 6th track, that was the one that I did in Lyon. I had come to the idea that I was building the character addresses. So in a sense, the musical changes that I made actually paralleled the evolution of the characters, meaning by the time I got to writing the music for the 6th track, I already had in my head what these characters would look like, how they would carry this to Earth, what their names would be, what they would be doing in a melodic function. That was the hardest part, meaning I had to have in my head their much larger expanse outside of that 15 minutes, and yet the 15 minutes kind of kept me from falling off the face of the earth with the idea, because I had the blueprint always in front of me, building this modular form. I mean, I never really wavered from that modular form in a very big way.
Who are some of the authors who you've been inspired by?
This buried deep inside a church vault, a Fabergé egg sits in the hands
I'm actually
of a
a very big
desiccated
Stephen
royal
King
woman. Outside on the street, in front of the Barrington family boutiques.
Oh, and we're getting a little bit of Mend in the background there. Sorry again. Then we had a little bit of audio interference.
Okay.
So who's that? So we're
I'm a very big Stephen King fan. I love the building of voice that he does by actually just having one voice narrate or interview someone, and then you are beginning to anticipate what the other voices are going to sound like yourself without being told. I think he does a marvelous job of building a separate reality and really surprising you without hitting you over the head that you have now fallen into his vision.
Yeah, he does have that ability to grab you. I've just read a bunch of his short stories that just came out, I think this year or last year. And he webbed together a few of these stories, whether it be the It and the modern version of that, and some of the other ones where he's got this underlying reality that none of us knew were there. And I think it's so exciting because it's similar to what you've done with Mend.
Exactly. What is that story that the Stephen King that did you tell me?
The Outsider just came out, and it was made into a television show on Netflix, I believe.
Yes. I'm trying to think of I can't quite think of the exact story I was thinking. It'll come to me, but I've read so many of his stories that he just has an amazing ability to set you up and pull you into his vision and do it in a very, very clever and slow way that you are very surprised each time.
And he's been in the business for such a long time. I mean, I've been reading his works for decades now, and he keeps current and so interesting to me. And whether sometimes his movies don't work, the movie settings of his work don't work out incredibly well, but I just find. What do you think when you watch his movies, when settings of his movies? Have you enjoyed some of those?
I like Carrie.
Great movie, yeah.
I think Carrie is also a very great story. I mean, I'm a Shirley Jackson lover too, right? So I mean, yeah, it's very similar to mine in the sense that you have a town, you have the central town and a community, and you have an artifact of, I wouldn't say necessarily witchcraft, but you have a thought process that is up for grabs. He does a very good job of that. Is this magic, or is this something else? And that something else has a big horizon to it. That's what I like very much about him, and also Shirley Jackson, and I'm sure think of others.
What do you think of such fantasy authors as like Tolkien or George R.R. Martin? Are those people who you enjoy their work?
You know, I see fantasy very different than science or sci-fi. I like Tolkien, but I don't cleave to that. I like the fact that it has a language to it, because obviously I put a language in mine that one has to buy in enough to the language to really, really understand it, although one can understand it just through the protagonist, because one needs to know no music in mine whatsoever, because she does all the deciphering. But I think the addition of a language that is just indigenous to the characters is a great advantage, because that's what seals the world, meaning a language is what seals that town or seals that world. And I think I have a big connection to that idea of language.
I think what separates your work certainly is your musical background. Obviously, your background as a composer is such a unique addition to this process. How does music help tell the story? Like, how do you characterize your characters? Is there any operatic elements of Verdi, Wagner in your mixture of influences?
Oh, very, very much so, because the whole 15-minute kernel began with the idea that this particular, it turns out in the beginning of the story that the inventor is actually in my story, meaning I have designated a character as an inventor, right? The inventor himself is also a conductor.
We like that around here.
A composer, right. So the idea is that he listens a lot to different pieces of music. And I also point to the fact that when I get to this melody that I have written, that I give to my young girl in the story, the idea of who really wrote this melody, because the melody I wrote is really a quodlibet, meaning I have 6 different quotes that I actually put in that melody. Upon hearing it, you wouldn't know it unless I pointed it out to you, or some people might. And the idea of ownership, meaning a pattern that's moving through all music, through this dynasty, all the way to my melody, saying like, is this melody really this girl's, or did she get it from the father as a lullaby? Or wait a minute, maybe she got it from the mother. The idea of how that music is transmitted in that familial household was very, very interesting to me. How one picks up quirks of language and one carries bits and pieces, and then one comes to compose, you're building a sound library your whole life. I wanted to make that very much part of the story, that this inventor had a sound library, and he does in my story. And the idea in the story is really that the characters themselves have this innate capability of tracking the melody, meaning they know this internal system of how they are communicating through this melody in a very Jungian way. And the inventor decides in the story that he's going to capture this for the public. And that becomes the fight in this dynasty, is he's giving away to the general public something that his family comes to town with. I won't give away everything, but
Sure.
I go back to the whole idea of royalty, divine right of kings, where leitmotifs come in. And the idea is that the girl does end up with the melody, not knowing that she is carrying such a prophetic and important tune, and gets killed because she doesn't realize that she can't write down in old-fashioned script something that now everybody wants, because the father, the inventor, has tripped the switch and said, you know what, I'm gonna let the public in on this little secret here. And his competitor, tries to go after the young girl because she is holding the access to this very important piece of information to get into this invention, and she doesn't know it. So many issues come into that, the idea of carrying so much talent, the burden of carrying that much talent. What does it mean that if you cannot actually write it down, are you not a composer? If you can just write down in electronic form, are you not a real composer because you can't write old-fashioned calligraphy? Many of these issues come up in the story.
Do you compose? When you compose, do you compose with pen and ink, or do you compose on the computer?
Well, my choir master and organist would be glad to talk to you about that, because I recently said to him, I used to, but I no longer am composing much, meaning I'm just in the idea of building a television series. So, it's a television series that has pieces that are like Stranger Things, Black Mirror.
Sure.
What is this connectivity? What is this messaging system? Nobody knows that it's musically designated in the beginning of the story. I actually make you go into the story to see that this is musically generated. At first, it's just this messaging system. This girl has secret access. She doesn't know she has it. She's killed. And the search for her CD is the search for how this connectivity works. So it had to get to that very simple form to be able to go into the much deeper meanings of the language and, the primal nature of music and what's driving these characters to fight over something that they think they have brought to her. So, in that sense, Close Encounters, right? The movie Arrival, all of these movies, The Matrix, that come in and start telling us, no, the information system works in a different way. You don't get it.
We're scratching the surface as mortal humans. Right. There's so much more to be discovered. And I think that, boy, what an interesting concept of space and time and integrating music into that. And we certainly are in a golden age of the long form series. Would you agree?
I think right. And I think the most important thing that I took my time to build in this, which was very difficult, I would not recommend it ever, was that it had to have, and my team certainly knows that this was the hardest part of this, it had to have this right unfolding. I had to write a film script that immediately had the opening scenes of this actual mechanism in it, meaning I had to give to these characters the exact right time clock that would unlock the whole canvas, the whole portrait. That was very hard because if it was off, then no one could, as you say, follow this trajectory but me. And that was out, meaning it had to have a blueprint that a director, a producer, other people, other writers could follow and build from it going forward and going back. The good news was that I actually wrote a whole lot of history for these characters. And then I put the pattern in many different artifacts. I put the whole city into a Fabergé egg and keep building that calligraphy as the egg moves from the 19th century to the 20th century to the 21st century. And these kids find this in Central Park. But I mean, I had to have that idea of building the blueprint, and that the blueprint had to be fixed with this hidden sequence that never changed.
How does one take a project that was originally a stage work and then conceive it for a different format, such as like television or film? How do you make that adjustment as a writer?
Very difficult. It was very hard. It was the biggest change was I actually wrote a kind of a Game of Thrones Bible for the inventor. It's basically the story of the inventor and his whole trajectory, telling this to his ex-wife. So that I had in my head actually the Beethoven's On die ferne Geliebte, so to the distant beloved, right? So I had to have in my head all these different sections of how this messaging system was unraveling in my master book. From that master book was this script that was actually very effective. But without that book, I never would have gotten there. It's my own blueprint. I mean, I had to have that.
Now, how do you, so you have your system. Did the system come first, or did the characters come first? Do you dream these characters? Do you like inhabit this when you're just walking around the streets and doing other things? How do you find inspiration for such innovative thinking?
Well, first of all, I built those characters easily 20 years. I mean, I was thinking very much about this royal family, this whole palace. I take you into, the Jardin du Luxembourg, and this whole history, like a Medici history. It's not the Medici history, but it's a history of this royal family. So I had real archetype characters in my head. The matriarch, the crown. Game of Thrones now would give you a lot of these kinds of archetypes. And they each had numerous functions to them. So it was, by certain terms, like Greek tragedy, Shakespearean, and the idea of they bring this beautiful thing to earth, and by the 21st century, they're killing each other. Right?
Sounds like human nature.
It's a puzzle that keeps filling in for them as to how this sequence works over the centuries. But really, in the story, very much the idea that they don't realize they've lost this until this inventor decides to give it away. Isn't that human nature, right? Meaning, so this whole idea of man-made, the idea of analog to digital is also in the story, meaning how we got to this digital technology. Because I am personally very affronted by the fact that everybody thinks, digital technology just showed up. So I take you back to the 20th century, and into this whole idea of this changing from analog to digital, and how we go from one piece of technology to another, so that the idea of digital in the family is really that the fingers, right, are they're doing the tabulating, not not the actual keypad, meaning the keypad is receiving the message, but it's happening from the characters themselves who are, right, putting this melodic pattern into the keypad. Luckily, the film script itself, I worked with some very talented people, it wasn't just me. And it took about 2.5 years, but did a very good job of that transmission for the protagonist, so that you're seeing that she comes of age in this story after her daughter dies by actually enunciating this skill that she doesn't even realize she has. So it's a lot of this, these pieces, again, sort of Stephen King-like, of awareness that come to these characters as they're moving through the story themselves, meaning their own self-awareness and how they use that skill.
So we have our first question from the audience, which we have a lot of people on today who are interested in what you're talking about. What was the original music, for the stage productions? Was there a pit orchestra? Was it pre-recorded? How did you make that come alive in the stage works?
Actually, the same exact way. It was built in 6 sections. So the very first section and the last section are tape. Then the middle sections were basically built like entr'actes. And I have actually a lot of video recording of those entr'actes. They were dance sections. And then the middle sections were completely orchestrated. I'm trying to think of the orchestration. I think 8 players in each one of them.
So a nice chamber
Yes.
layering. Interesting.
Yes. The first and last track were mirrored, so that the first track was this analog system. And then by the time you get to track 6, you have this musique concrète, kind of, I put these French prepositions in these kind of Spielberg actually way of notating this kind of these character addresses, so that you would begin to understand the character addresses as something in the cosmos, or also like a domain address, or a license plate, or a home address, so that the mutability of those addresses were carried by the characters no matter where they went. But this is something you discover in the story as it unfolds.
So there's so much underneath the story you're telling that. But does someone need to be musically conversant to get this, or is it something they'll just get because it's a great story?
They don't need to know any. That was the hard part. Meaning, by the time it got to Hollywood, and the film script came, it's completely embedded in the information system that this protagonist finds in the Library of Congress. She finds that a child has been killed in the Middle Ages. He's buried in these parts of the city that I was just telling you about. So the metaphors and the connections I make to the humans is already embedded. So there's no need to know any musical information at all.
But I think that if you do understand that, for some of the people like you, your composer or a conductor or musicians, I think it'll make it extra special because it's so much about what we live as artists. I think that's fascinating.
Yes, the melody itself, thank goodness, was very effective. This main melody, Ray's theme, and it begins as this very diabolical lullaby and then grows into this kind of Shostakovich hopscotch that is imprinting its information system all around the world. So the music itself is by nature doing a lot of the tone painting and taking you even from chapter to chapter or episode to episode without you even realizing that it has a locator system in it. I mean, I had to know, right, that each episode or each environment was being controlled by this music pathway, but the listener or the reader does not have to know.
It's exciting. And you have to understand for your composition work, you have to be able to master all these styles. Did you study? What were your primary genres you wrote in studying?
I actually was a voice and piano student. I really, to tell you the truth, I learned because I was an usher and a backstage assistant for many years at what was then Philharmonic Hall. So listened to the great, the masters time and time again. I cannot tell you how much that mentorship helped me figure out pieces that I wouldn't have known, but I was not schooled in, orchestration. It was actually the harder thing for me to do, except for the fact that I hear the information as an instrument to begin with.
Such an interesting process and unique. But I think that a mutual friend of ours, Jeffrey Beagle, was on our show, and he talked about, he had this metaphor over and over again, and I keep on bringing it up because I love it. He was like, everyone's got to find their yellow brick road. And your yellow brick road is so unique. You've done so many different things. So as you're traveling, and this is in the back of your mind over 20 or 30, probably 30 years, how did this unfold for you? And how does it continue to unfold for you? And you've done a lot of different things. Was this always under the surface as you're going about teaching at universities and you're composing and you're doing business work? Has this always been there?
To a degree, off and on. When I was a professor, I was an adjunct assistant and also a guest professor, but I also was a dance accompanist. So I had many different aspects of being in a classroom, and I carried it with me. But by the time 2005, 2006 came around, I already had a script in my hand, and the script actually launched everything else. From there, I could see this go forward and backwards. It's this whole buy-in that I give you, this whole trajectory to the protagonist who opens this screen with the secret pattern of this girl who dies. I mean, I had to actually, the hardest part of this was I had to build all this layering. And then for argument's sake, because I wanted to build a company of my own, an idea, an information system, I had to actually take that layering apart and dismantle it and redraft it and make it much more digestible, because I had to get away from the idea that I was writing this to keep myself interested. But the script does actually, I think, and so I have two producers now who are very interested in a possible distribution deal and taking this to the next level. And I've had two other main, very well-known companies read this who really liked it. The issue will become and is, can this be done not for, $250 million, meaning it's such a big vision that it has to be scaled down so that the episodes can unravel and then the ROI to a commercial property can be realized. That was very hard because I didn't think like that in the beginning, but I certainly do now.
I guess it takes a whole team, a creative team, to take your vision. I mean, something like I watched Game of Thrones, for example, which is a very large scale world that I guess that the author wrote for many years before it was turned into the series that premiered from the books. And it must be very hard to watch your vision come alive like that. I hope that we have this conversation in a year as this is coming together and hitting the screen. But what must it be like for to sit back there and watch this come together? Did you like those? Did you like those books? Was that something you watched or?
I did. By now, it's a relief to me. I actually wrote this to be handed off to other people to give them work and to take it to the next level and add things and delete things. I'm actually about adaptation. There's not too much that I think you can do to this to pull apart the central sequence that I'm telling you about, the girl who leaves the melody behind, and basically the access code opens the screen for this protagonist. I'm actually quite looking forward to other people's vision as to where this can go.
It's incredible to bring in other voices and other minds and to watch it like what was it like to watch it come together in the stage production when you took your vision and you saw the concrete characters on the stage and actors make them come to life?
Well, actually, I got as far as to number 5, and then 2 of them didn't get done, and I was very upset about that. But to go into it, I actually was on the works in process of the Guggenheim series, a woman named Mary Sharp Cranston at the time. And she said to me, this is it's sort of where it got stopped. She said to me, this is going to take so much money to do the next piece. And I pulled back. That's when I actually sent the music to a Hollywood agent, just the music. And they said, oh, this will make a great video game. So at that point, everybody had a different idea of how this should be maximized. And that actually was a very difficult thing for me. I don't think I necessarily made the right decisions, but that's when I pulled back and said, if I'm going to work this hard, I'm going to take this one script and build a whole company out of it, because all of these different things that people are talking about can be fleshed out later if I can get this into a scalable series. But that took another decade.
Well, you're lucky because this is the golden age of the long-form series. If you had to put all these concepts into a movie, there's just only so many threads you can get across in a movie. But that's one thing I've learned is that today audiences want long-form series, and I think that Netflix, for example, streaming services, I think that the COVID era, what do you think about this? That the COVID era is forcing us to change how we view movies. I think we see less movies per se and more long-form series. I think we're seeing that trend right in front of our eyes.
Oh, for sure. First of all, people's attention span, number one, has changed. The way information is delivered to everyone has changed. Time itself has changed because our 9-to-5 workday is really dissipating before our eyes. And I'm very preoccupied with emergent time. So, I think that all of that impacts this COVID era, and I don't think we're going to be moving away from that. I think we're going to be moving into it because of the whole idea of social media. So one of the aspects of this story is how these scenes actually work the social media in the story itself, meaning I'm not making you go outside of the story to understand how the messaging system in my story will actually work within Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, have your pick. Because this pattern remains the pattern and it opens the screen to any messaging. And what it does also is to customize the route. And I think what I've added here, if I had to say that I've added anything, is the customization and the personalization, because I'm opening a toolbox really to the user. Meaning they will be able to see the series and then they can take off from there with their own customized toolbox as they learn the tools of the characters. Because the characters, it's a learning mechanism. The characters are teaching themselves and they're teaching you. So I think we're in that age now of great knowledge and unfolding information that has to be relevant and usable. And the idea also that we have to discern what's relevant and usable is something I think that's very tricky now. I think that's where we're getting into this trouble in social media and the political vista that I don't even want it to go to.
We can certainly, there's certainly no lack of arguing voices and shouting voices on social media. And I think maybe we have so many choices of entertainment and so many choices of sources of that noise that it's just almost overwhelming.
I agree. Well, in the book, I start in a slightly different place in the first book than in the film. It's the same content, but I start on Wall Street as these guys are talking about this girl, whether she's dead or alive, and what their tune does to their libido and their trading, meaning it's infecting them. And this is a very powerful part of the story to show that music has that kind of reach, that it's reaching into absolutely everything we do. And in terms of Music Matters, I can't think of a better time to talk about the fact that, music is an infectious medium, even when you don't hear it, right?
We realize when it's gone, when live music is pretty much stopped these days. I think we're seeing that how much we need it and how much it's missed. I mean, there's all sorts of online ways of doing that. We're seeing a lot of streaming concerts and a lot of screen concerts and some outdoor concerts. But boy, the sheer going to a concert is, I think people are missing it more and more.
Right, because that's an energy system in that room that cannot really be replicated online. It's just the transmission. I mean, it's very much like the transmission of COVID, unfortunately, meaning in the sense of our cells are our cells, and human organism makes the music to begin with.
Good point.
Right, and I think that's very lost now. Meaning even when a melody is moving by itself away from the composer, away from the singer, away from the pianist, it's carrying the information system of that originator. I once heard that music defines ancestry, a place of birth, meaning on the map, more than it defines gender or anything. It's defining place. And this is very prevalent in the story that I wrote, that the idea of place and origin and this lost place and origin, and that the melody is going to bring them there.
Well, I tell my undergraduates, I do an introductory course to Western art music, and I always talk that music is like the amber of society. It captures whatever is going on around it, whether it be the history, whether it be the theory, whether it be the social circles of the composers. It's all there, trapped in time, and it's very similar to what your device. It's not far from that at all.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So in each of these characters, they're kind of data mining this thing that you're talking about, meaning they are, and each one of them has a different function in the actual, obviously, the plot of the story. And hopefully the plot is very rich in itself outside of the music, because in my mind, the music actually was just building the character's personality. In fact, the first manager I ever had read the master book and said, "Oh my God, is this scary?" He goes, you can't clone a personality." He said, "If only I knew where this voice was coming from." I said, "Well, that's exactly the point of the story. You don't." Meaning, it's the way a composer is writing with their singing voice, that they are downloading this. They're not asking where it's coming from. They're just writing. So it's interesting that aspect was picked up by the first manager I had, the first reader, saying, he was transfixed, but he really wanted to know where that voice was coming from.
We have another question from the audience. This is a good one. Let's see. This is from Steve from Brooklyn. And we have a question. He asks, is there a chance to hear any of the musical excerpts? And how can we find out more about this MEND universe?
Oh, yes. I have much of the music is on the website, and I also, if anybody wants to email me, I can send them a few more of the music links. I'm perfectly happy to do that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We're going to put the website address on the screen so people can check it out. It's menduniverse.com.
MEND, yeah.
And tell us what MEND stands for.
Music Encode Decode.
Music Encode Decode.
Right. Of course, there's a lot of play on the word mend, but Music Encode Decode, right.
Well, it's so fascinating to talk to someone who is such a massive philosophical thinker, a musician and artist, and then synthesizing that into the art form of today. I think that what made opera so special in the 1600s was the synthesis of the arts. You're doing that, the Florentine Camerata did today with even more of the arts. So I'm a huge fan, and I can't wait to see where this goes and watching this program grow.
Thank you very much for having me on. Well, it's looking back, one wouldn't jump off a cliff to do this process. It kind of unfolded to me for many, many personal reasons as well, and kept informing me and helping me to see what I could do with it. And something I had a legacy idea. I wanted to leave something behind that I thought had something to say. So I'm really at a closure point in this now, meaning I have built the world to the scale that I believe is manageable and can be broken up into this long form that you're talking about.
Well, Marty, thank you so much. This is Mardi-Ellen Hill and talking about the MEND universe. Be sure to check out this information on her website. It goes into detail on these topics and the characters, and I invite you to check it out and to connect with this really visionary artist. Marty, thank you so much. I look forward to being in touch as we go forward and to hear great news.
Thank you so much, Jason. This was lovely.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Music Matters 2020, Music Matters 2020, and we thank you. We so much appreciate you being here. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that bell icon for the most up-to-date information and upcoming guests and topics. We have a second author of the week coming up on Thursday, and Maria Cristina Necula, who just released her book called The Don Carlos Enigma, is going to explore the historical figure of Don Carlos and how he's been set in music and art. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. So please join us at 6 o'clock on Thursday. And remember, keep music alive. Good night.